SeatGeek is the official sponsor of the Snake Sports Talk Show, with hundreds of events listed, live concerts, sporting events, and so much more. Go on to SeatGeek.com, enter promo code Snake Sports Talk Show, and save yourself $20 off your first purchase.
Live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts right now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are on a spectacular Saturday in the 702 in Las Vegas. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show, wherever and however you may be watching and listening, live on every platform known to man: iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram. Those are the medias to like, follow, subscribe, and hit the bell button. Keep you up to date on future and past shows. This Saturday is rocking, baby. We are stacked with the Jeff Carr Locked On Reds and Aaron Freeman Locked On Falcons in hour one. And hour two is just going to get as good too, and we don't stop there. So, man, a lot of topics, especially with the NFL. Outlooks of free agency, plus cap situations with a bunch of them. World Baseball Classic around the corner. And, of course, spring training. We just got our first gist of a couple games with the newly implemented rules. I'll be talking about that here in a little bit. So it's going to be fun. And we've got a lot in store for you today. So I wanted to touch upon this subject because we know free agency is coming up March 15th. Mark your calendars. That's at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday. And one of the topics of discussions is this. So here's my one thing, is that I think about this with certain businesses. You watch businesses and how they run internally. And then you'll have certain people who come in and they do one of two things. They either are very innovative in the company, or there's tendencies the company just now starts to go downhill and there's no other added changes. So the ones who I think that are very motivating, who are also, I think, very innovative when it comes to, culture changes, and not to mention too, we're innovating in technology. Better ways to really make it easier and efficient for us, the public. And a lot of those big time companies, we know Amazon, we know, Uber, a lot of these companies, they made it a lot more efficient for us in our daily lives. And then back then, we had certain companies that it lasted for quite some time before the big change. But sometimes that does happen. Companies either continuously innovate, or some they kind of hit that wall and there's nothing else that they build upon. And then that's when a lot of changes start to happen. So my point on this, so the New York Giants know they have a payday they have to come across, and that is quarterback Daniel Jones. I'm just going to tell you right now, if you are not named Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, I think two honorable mentions I will put there is Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, possibly. If you're not any one of those quarterbacks, I'm not spending 40 plus million a year. So Daniel Jones, what has it looked like in his entirety of his career? Because we know he's a good kid. He's a good quarterback. I think he's a mirroring image of Eli Manning, to be honest, because he just kind of looks and feels the part for the Giants. He really does. I think about it each time when I really just think that with Daniel Jones, he runs better, throws a better football. But the problem with it is that in his career, he's had different splits. So let me look at the stats from 2019 to 21, and I apologize for my listeners, but here was the look, is that in his rookie year, when it was time to start passing on from Eli Manning, he completed 61% of his throws, 24 touchdowns, 12 picks, and had a quarterback rating of at the very least 55. So even though Daniel Jones would be efficient in some areas, there were still some concerns. Now remember, they were coming off of different coaching staffs. They had uh, they had Pat Shermer, and then of course got to Joe Judge. So from 20 to 21, he was completing at least about average 63% of his throws, had 11 touchdowns, 10 picks, 10 touchdowns and 7 picks, and still had the quarterback rating of just about subpar 50. Now let's look at the stat this past year with a more better, I think also too, a very innovative and a smart head coach in Brian Daboll. 67% of his throws, 15 touchdowns, 5 picks, and a quarterback rating of 60. So notice a little bit of this jump. And I say this all the time. Coaching staffs matter where you are. Brian Daboll was given an opportunity in several places. The Chargers could have hired him, but instead they went with a young defensive-minded coach in Brandon Staley. Yeah, how's that working out? And Justin Herbert, we know, is as great as he is. Brian Daboll, he's been around in the league for years. He's worked with certain quarterbacks. He's worked with several of them. And he got dealt the hand with the Giants and turned them into a playoff team. By the way, changed a lot about Daniel Jones's game. Now remember, the first 3 years of Daniel Jones's career doesn't really look promising, does it? Nowadays, if you're not completing over 67% of your throws, hard to really make it in this league. And I just see Daniel Jones, like he's a good kid. I think there's parts of him that he could really improve. I think there's a bunch of it where if he's in the trenches, is he somebody that's going to give you that fourth quarter clutch drive like a Derek Carr or Tom Brady or some of them, or even Patrick Mahomes at this point? But your asking price of $45 million per year, yeah. And by the way, there was too early of rankings. You know where Daniel Jones sat at? 16th. I'm going to expect to pay $45 million to somebody who was ranked 16th amongst a lot of star quarterbacks. And I still got the same top 5. Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Herbert, Trevor Lawrence. I still got the same 5. If you're not within that category, I'm not putting 40 plus on you a year. And Daniel Jones, I think honestly, the best case scenario would be maybe about 36 to 38 million a year, but that is my cutoff. And the reason I say that, look at Dak Prescott. This is where the truth really unfolded. He cannot make the throws that Justin Herbert can. And Kellen Moore, people thought Kellen Moore was the issue in Dallas when it came to offensive play call. Yes, that there were a couple of calls that were questionable, but the offense in the last few years he's been an offensive coordinator has been top 5. So it can't be that bad, but you know the limitations of Dak Prescott. That's why the Cowboys are where they are. Dak Prescott can't go a single day without support and help. He needs an offensive line. He needs wide receivers. He needs a run game. He needs all these things. Because in order for him to be a productive quarterback and really lead the team to the promised land, he needs to have that. The other part, he needs to have the right head coach. I know a lot of you don't think and don't find Mike McCarthy's coaching antics a little attractive, but to me, it's about the best as you got. It works. I mean, Dallas in the past 2 seasons he's been there,
I mean, they've won 10 plus games. They've made it to the playoffs. They are competitive in their division, especially with Philadelphia making it to the Super Bowl. But to kind of say that Kellen Moore was the issue, I don't know. I'd be curious to see how the year will be with the Chargers when Justin Herbert is rebounding from a questionable year with an offensive coordinator who was very conservative and just had a lot of checkdowns. But Daniel Jones, and by the way, Mike Kafka, really good offensive coordinator, really worked well with Brian Dable and really kind of opened more of the playbook. When I started to see Daniel Jones, you watch that game against Minnesota in the playoffs. Notice how Daniel Jones wasn't phased. He wasn't nervous. He ran the football efficiently, got first downs, made some accurate throws. Yeah, that is Brian Daboll's fingerprints all over that puppy. I don't, and again, I'm not taking anything away from Daniel Jones, but you saw Daniel Jones and the previous two coaches that were there, Pat Shurmur and Joe Judge. It didn't work. Brian Dable, and he comes. He had Josh Allen as a quarterback, and he's dealing with Daniel Jones. Now they have a serious discussion they have to make. And I know New York media, the only thing I can say about this, if you know you have a quarterback that has certain limitations, but you could still win games with him, then you pay it the respectful way to where he's getting the say and the franchise is in good hands to where they don't miss on an opportunity of an offensive lineman or for a corner or for a wide receiver. I know Daniel Jones, he had a lot of questionable wide receivers. Kenny Golladay couldn't catch most of the ball, and he was absent. Kadarius Toney, he was injury prone until they sent him out to Kansas City. Richie James, I think, is a pretty good wide receiver, but I think they might want to start looking more. But this is also the blockage because you have to think of who are you investing more in, Daniel Jones or Saquon Barkley. If you lose Saquon, you got to now address the running back position. I think Saquon had his first ever full season. He looked healthier than ever, and he looked promising. So there's a lot to talk about with the Giants, but I'm telling you, I've watched this narrative. Look at the Cowboys. Look at the Vikings. Look at some of these teams that have quarterbacks that have certain limitations. You pay about 40 plus million a year to those quarterbacks. There goes your potentiality of making the playoffs and being deeper into the playoffs to possibly getting into a Super Bowl. It happens with a lot of teams. They make mistakes on it, but you know with what you're getting in bed with the second you sign that contract. Cowboys, they got a lot to think about. They're not even going to franchise tag, let alone sign Dalton Schultz. There goes your producing tight end that you have, and then they're probably going to end up fixing the offensive line. But this is where you have to think about your scenario. It sucks. I know it's pressurizing, but that's what you have to come down to. All right. Spring training games were really, really entertaining yesterday because, of course, we had Manny Machado sounding off of about the pitch count. But joining us live via the Global Satellite Network, presented by StreamYard in the National League with those Cincinnati Reds, Jeff Carr. So spring training, I always love it this time of year because spring's in the air. We're going into my birthday month of March, and so I love it that baseball is officially back. So what were your thoughts now on the implemented rules of that pitch count? Because I do think it's going to take some time for pitchers and for batters to get adjusted to, because even Manny Machado said it. I may be 0-1 almost majority of the season, but you know what? That kind of, heightens a little the awareness. How did you kind of see this play out since the first couple of spring training games started?
From my perspective, I really enjoy it. I mean, that clip that was kind of going viral around Twitter, at least around baseball folks, of the fact that an entire at bat took like 1 minute is such a game changer. Like, we're talking in the statistics from the minor leagues where they implemented the pitch clock last year, the average game time was cut by almost 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And as a fan of a team that for the last couple of years has really gone through the ringer a little bit as far as the wonderful R word rebuild goes, there were some games that, were creeping up on 4 hours and we're all just kind of looking around like, seriously? Come on now. Come on. I mean, we love baseball, but come on.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love the effect that this pitch clock is going to have on games like that.
And you got to think, because I mean, look, you and I, we both love baseball, but I'm not sitting there on a Tuesday night with a 3+ hours if we can't determine a winner. Listen, people
Yeah.
gave pushback on, the ghost runner rule. Here's what I like. I liked it that it was implemented in regular season. Don't dare put that in postseason, because I think of this as like the relationship it has with hockey, because
Mhm.
you have 5-minute overtimes. If you can't get a winner by then you go into shootouts, and that's what determines the winner. It's energizing and it's fun, and then it makes the game go by faster. I think the same way. But I think maybe in your thought, because I thought of the ghost runner, is this has to challenge batters to hit the right side. Hit the right side. Because I get a lot of them, they're just pulling, they're trying to hit it out of the ballpark. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm like, look, I care about runs and average and runners in scoring position. So it is going to take a little bit of time to really adjust to these rules, right?
Yeah, and I know that the Ghost Runner's been around for a little while, but now you also kind of add back in the fact that there's not going to be that dramatic shift. You're not going to have that guy in shallow right field, so you will kind of bring the pull hitter back into play. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how teams combat that. I mean, I'm looking forward to the day that we see the first team put their left fielder in shallow right field and kind of compromise the left side of their outfield, but it's coming. Somebody's going to do it. I'm not sure who, but it's definitely going to happen as teams noticed a huge uptick in, especially Joey Votto. I've said this multiple times on our podcast. One of his best strengths is the ability to hit this short looping line drive to shallow right field that's for a single. And that's really where the early part of his career, he was hitting 300 because of those hits. And he's like, if all else fails, I can drop one in right there. Well, he hasn't been able to do that for the last couple of years where that dramatic shift has existed. So when he starts doing that, I'm going to be interested to see if there are teams that still try to figure out a way to get that to work. But when it comes to the Ghost Runner, yeah, it's I think the strategy of it all, and you always hear people ask, well, why don't they bunt the runner over to third or, something like that? I still think that it doesn't necessarily do, because a lot of people are like, well, it keeps them from going 15 innings. That wasn't happening that much anyway.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know that we completely got rid of 15 inning games, but it at least allows a little bit of an excitement where you may have started to think, okay, now we're getting into the back of the bullpen. We're worried about maybe a starter having to come out here, or we're going to, God forbid, a position player pitching. So, which is fun to see. But I mean, when you've been working for 3.5 hours to try and get a win, and it comes down to whether or not your shortstop can throw strikes, that's a little bit precarious.
Yeah, plus two, it takes a ripple effect on your lineup and the pitching rotation, because if it goes that long in a game, I mean, we see this with teams all the time. They need added rest. They need times to where, most starters, they've got to really rest their arms. And so that's where I think this will benefit it, but it will take some time for people to really adjust it. So let's talk about that with Joey Votto, because I watched him all throughout the years, even when he won, the MVP. He's just the heart and soul of this Reds team. Now, this team, I've watched it. It's like I've always watched the stock market. They either go up and then they somehow, some way start going down, and it's this whole ripple effect. But Joey Votto just remains to be the the rock for the Reds. And I watched him, and even when you mentioned those hits to right center field, I even think of the other way, where I even liked it when he outsmarts guys and when he hits to left center, because he just has that capability. He could put that baseball anywhere he likes. So what is this leadership with Joey Votto really meant to this team? Because he's gone through, refresh after refresh. And are you kind of seeing some signs that, Joey Votto, he's probably thinking of this thing on the back of his mind, or is he kind of comfortable with, being here in Cincinnati?
I know he's comfortable. There's been many of people ask him like, would you accept a trade to so and so? And usually the question involves, would you accept a trade to Toronto and you can go chase a ring in Toronto and that's closer to where he's from and all this other stuff. And he's gotten to the point where he answers those questions like, I'm actually an American citizen now. Like I love Cincinnati. I've spent my career here. If I'm winning here. And I've always been intrigued by that because I feel like Joey has given everything that he has had to this franchise, and they have used his contract as an albatross around their necks to, say why they couldn't compete and talk about why they couldn't build a team around him. So it's kind of been a one-way street, and yet he still continues to drive down it. So I've been very happy from that aspect because I'm a huge Joey Votto fan, always have been. And he's never been when you talk about leadership, he's never been a vocal leader. Like you think of, different guys in the locker room that are really going to lead a ball club. Like the Reds had one in the early 2010s with Scott Rowland. Like he's never been that guy. He's always been a lead by example type of dude. And, my play is going to speak for me. But that's one of the different refreshes that he went through last year. And not necessarily in a vocal rah-rah way, but you actually saw his personality. Because for much of his career, he's always been the reclusive kind of budding star that plays super well, but he's not really going to talk that much. And then this past year, he really dealt with the torn rotator cuff that he had actually, managed for 5 years. At least that's what he said in an interview. He had managed for 5 years before he had to get surgery this past season. And after he had surgery and was out for the rest of the year, he was in the booth. He was announcing games. There was a game where he was out in the stands, just randomly sitting at different spots to talk with fans. And I know that went viral, but I was at that game and I'm like, man, where's he at? I want to see if I can go find him. Didn't get a chance to. That would have been amazing. But yeah, I think that he's got another good year in him. He might have 2 more good years in him. It's just that, the contract situation has been kind of at the forefront when you're talking about Joey Votto in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I think about this too because there have been a bunch of Cincinnati greats. I mean, I am still a firm believer that at some point we've got to get Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame. I mean, look, you want to talk about gambling scenario. I mean, take for instance Calvin Ridley. He just did that himself, made a bet on himself, and then there was the suspension. I think we're kind of past that plateau now. We've got to really start to get Charlie Hustle in there. I mean, Barry Larkin. We had Griffey Jr. at a time, and then even a lot of great players. And so Joey Votto adding into that list would be absolutely surreal and something that down the road, I mean, it would be great for Reds fans. And I mean, I've seen the gist of, the Reds even in 2010 when I watched Joey Votto play up in person when we were here during, the baseball weekend when it would be here in Vegas and they would play the Dodgers. So watching him, then Brandon Phillips, he's that guy and a lot of those. And, so it is kind of interesting because seeing the roster when you had Brandon Phillips, Joey Votto, Ryan Ludwig, you had Scott Rowland, Drew Stubbs, you had a real good lineup, but it was just hard to get over the hump, especially when you had a bunch of NL teams that were very competitive. So here we are with some young kids, Jonathan India, Nick Senzel. Who are you kind of keeping sights on for the Reds that you kind of see with his talent, with his presence, and you go, this guy may be the next big thing that we may love to see here in Cincinnati? What do you think?
I definitely think, and it's nice because they're batting 1-2 today in the spring training opener against the Guardians. But Jonathan India and Tyler Stevenson are kind of trying to get their wheels on that track. I'm not going to say that they're on track just yet, but I mean, Jonathan India, Rookie of the Year, he did have a sophomore slump, but he attributed that to the fact that he came into camp bulked up and ready to hit some dingers last year. And that's just not who he is. He is a gritty player. He plays with speed. He plays with heart. And he cut down 10 pounds before this camp. He said, I was not in the correct, physical shape last year to play my game. And I really got myself out of my game. So I'm very excited to see how that affects him. He's ready to bounce back. He's hungry. And he's also talking about, and I talked about how Joey Votto's not a vocal leader. Jonathan India came into this year and he's just like, look, this team has gone through such a tumultuous period where the roster just keeps turning over and turning over and turning over. Now it feels like it's going to build up. The guys that are here aren't going anywhere. I mean, you might see like the Reds signed Will Myers in the offseason. If Will Myers blows up, he might be a trade deadline, candidate for the Reds. Other than that, they're not really trading anybody because there's a lot of young guys that they're trying to build the core around. Jonathan India is like, I'm ready to be that leader. I'm ready to step it up. We're getting on the same mindset. And then on the Tyler Stevenson front, he has been a phenomenal catcher. He was kind of, billed as one of the best prospects that we've had in the last 10 years. And when he came up, you could see it right away. The guy just hits. He's got amazing plate discipline. He can hit to all fields. And he's not a one-trick pony. He's not a guy that's trying to, lift the ball out of the ballpark. He'll hit a line drive for a double if you need him to. But he's that guy that you want up with runners in scoring position in crunch time. He's going to get that hit. He can do it every single time, and I have faith that if he's the guy at the plate, the Reds are going to get that run. And he is a guy last year that was hurt and only played 50 games. And in those 50 games, the Reds averaged an entire run more than when he was out of the lineup. So they knew that. The organization knew that coming into this offseason. So a stated goal was, how do we keep his bat in the lineup? Because he kept enduring such fluky injuries. I mean, he broke his collarbone off of a foul tip. Like, that's not something you talk about an injury-prone guy. Like, it just happens to some catchers. And it even hit the padding. Like, it wasn't as if it, missed the padding there. So it's so weird how that all happened to him. And so they're like, okay, we brought in two guys, a former Red and Kirk Casale, and Luke Maile, who was kind of on the come up last year with the Guardians, and they're going to kind of share the load at catcher. Tyler Stevenson's going to DH, and he's going to play some first base whenever we give Joey Votto a DH day or an off day or something like that. And then that way we can keep his bat in the lineup for 140 or 150 games, so long as he stays healthy. And that is just such a huge thing because he is such a productive player. And especially last season where this lineup struggled many a time to score multiple runs. There were so many games where it's just like, well, we're down by 2. That's it. And it might be the third inning, but you're like, well, it's 2 runs. That's a lot. This lineup's hard to get to 2 runs. So, but with Tyler Stevenson, they can do it.
Yeah, because we know with injury prone, and not to mention too, there were inconsistencies in this lineup, and and I evaluate the 1 through 6, and I think there's some real good possibilities with this team where they can strive to be very offensive. They could also be ones that can create runners in scoring position, and they could really make this team a threat, especially with an NL Central. It's wide open. I know you got the Brewers, who at times they'll get on hot streaks, then they get cool. The Cubs may be a team to sneak in, but I don't know how long, that train itself may last. So you might have, this may be a division where you're going to have teams that are going to go on streaks. And then some that, depending on what I'm seeing, is there an adjustment in the lineup? Is there an adjustment not only to the rotation, but maybe to the bullpen, that they're strong now? They're kind of holding their own ground. So it's kind of a tough competition from there. But before I talk about it, when I look at that lineup, I mean, with Jonathan India, Aristides Aquino, and some of these guys, what kind of production are we going to expect out of Aquino? Because I saw him and I was like, okay, this guy's got some pop. I almost see a little bit of a Ryan Ludwig type. What are you, how would you project Aquino this season?
Well, actually, Aquino is no longer with the Reds. He's over in Japan now.
Oh, no.
But they do have a guy that's going to slot right into the big power role. And I've been saying for the last couple of days, he's hitting 5th today. He's playing center field. You are talking to the Harbinger, the man who creates the Will Benson fan club. The Reds traded for Will Benson from the Guardians. The Guardians were looking to make room on their 40-man roster, and they had to get rid of him because they have a pretty nice outfield already. And he's 24 years old, former first-round pick. His scouting grades have his raw power at a 70 and his game power at a 60. And he's a guy that if he can kind of mitigate his strikeouts, and it's not in the same vein as Aristides Aquino, where Aquino kind of had two really big holes in his swing. Will Benson he's a very patient hitter that waits on his pitch and sometimes waits a little bit too much. So he's got the plate discipline that he can kind of augment a little bit and become a better hitter. And he's the kind of guy that can hit the ball out of the ballpark. At Great American Ballpark, you always have the Toyota Tundra that's in center field. It's kind of back a little bit, and you look at it and you're like, okay, that could be in play, but only for a select few people. So we always ask, we're like, who's got the power to hit that thing? Will Benson's got the power to hit that thing. Plus, he's fast and he plays center field very well. So he's going to be a guy that Reds fans especially, but people just don't know right now. But I think he's going to be a force in the middle of the Reds lineup and in the middle of the outfield for the Reds. Hopefully he's going to announce it this year, and then he's going to be out there for multiple years.
All right, Will Benson. All right, I'll definitely have to keep an eye on this kid, because it's funny you mentioned that, because it's almost as similarly like how the Brewers have that in Miller Park, where they've got that truck right there and caged up. So yeah, that's quite the challenge. Maybe somebody needs to put like a target there and just says, hit me there, even if you got to get that in play.
Yeah, they have a thing under the power stacks. Like if you hit the sign, you win the Tundra, but we're just like, nah, nobody wants to hit the sign. Hit the Tundra itself. Let's see what happens.
Right. Yeah. So, talking about the division before we wrap it up. So it's wide open. So there's a bunch of, there's competition that's there. And now we know that, Andrew McCutchen, he's going back to where it all started in Pittsburgh. And so you look at this NL Central and you're just kind of thinking to yourself, yeah, we've got a lot of young kids, but there may be times you may give other team fits. How do you project the NL Central this year, knowing that the Brewers at times, they could get streaky, but could kind of fall a little bit depending on situational matchups. And then you got the Cubs, they bring in new pieces. How do you kind of see this playing out for the Reds? And could they, like somewhere, I always look at late in the season, where if teams are going to give you fits, I kind of see the Reds kind of play that role. What do you think?
The Reds are also going to be a lot of fun too, because they've got a lot of great young players that are going to be coming up from the minor leagues, especially when you talk about Ellie De La Cruz. He'll be up, pretty. I'm pretty sure it's going to be close to Memorial Day. Just an absolute firecracker, going to be the kind of guy that changes the course of the franchise. Plus, you have another power hitter and a guy in Christian Encarnacion Strand, but even more so, just a bunch of dudes that are going to transform the way this team looks. I would say that if you're asking if the Reds have a chance to win the division, I'd say the chances are greater than 0, but probably less than 1%. But hey, there's a chance. There's a very, very tiny chance. The biggest thing for me, I look at this division as the Cardinals to lose, but there's one huge thing that can change that. And usually you don't say, because obviously you can make the Mike Trout argument that he hasn't really helped out the Angels, but one player makes it or breaks it for the Cardinals. If Paul Goldschmidt gets hurt, this division is wide open.
Yep.
Because that lineup is so dependent on him and Nolan Arenado. And I know that they just got Castillo from the Cubs, but I don't look at this and think that this is, or Contreras, not Castillo, that this is their division to lose no matter what. Like, they are not a team that can replace a Paul Goldschmidt. So I'm very interested to see if he misses a significant amount of time this year, what happens, because I think below the Cardinals, there could be a situation where at the end of the year, maybe 5 to 6 games separates second place from last place in this division, because I think the Brewers, they've really stepped in it with Corbin Burns. I don't know what they're thinking. They need to back up the Brinks truck for that guy and make sure you keep him in Milwaukee, but they're trying to play some kind of weird game with that. And then, like you said, the Cubs are going to be a little bit scrappy. I wonder about their pitching a little bit, but I think that their lineup is definitely very good. And then the Pirates, I think, are going to surprise a lot of people. I think their over-under win total is still at like 67.5, and I smashed the over on that. I think that they're going to win at least 78 games, especially with, you're talking about a full year from O'Neal Cruz. He's going to figure it out. That guy's just a monster. And some of the other guys that they got coming up too, especially in the pitching staff, is going to be very interesting to see. And I know that they added some veterans in some key areas, but those guys better be looking over their shoulder, because the young talent in Pittsburgh is ready to come up. And if they can actually commit to it, as opposed to years past where they haven't, then the Pirates can really blow up this year.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I just look at the state of this division and I know that, yeah, you're absolutely right. And by the way, this will be the first year ever we don't have Yadier Molina behind the plate.
Yeah.
So now Wilson Contreras is coming in and he has to fill in the big shoes. So there's kind of some pressure right there for the Cardinals. But but it'll be interesting because even if you get the Pirates or you get the Reds, that they'll be, yeah, they're kind of going through a little more of the change within the organization. But if they're there and they're giving you fits with as far as, well, it's a team that if they're hitting and they're getting runners in scoring position and they're putting the pressure on opposing teams, because I always look for that for push to playoffs, because especially when you get the Cardinals or the Brewers, it's how do you handle that kind of pressure? Because you ain't going to show up like that if you're playing the Phillies or the Mets or the Dodgers or Padres. So, that's where I really look at this division as, there's a lot of real good talent. There's also some young bloods that are coming in and they are ready to play. And so
Yeah.
I think this will be interesting. I'm kind of excited to see which new young cats are going to come in and they're going to be the surprise of the league. So we'll see exactly how the season starts out from there. Jeff, I appreciate your time. Where can people find you to find everything Cincinnati Reds?
You can find Locked On Reds everywhere you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. And you can follow my co-host, Stephen Offenbaker, at S Offenbaker with 2 Fs. So we love to talk Reds, and we're actually going to have a quick little live pregame show today before the 3:05 pitch, 3:05 Eastern time for the Reds and Guardians.
All right, so you guys do not want to end up missing that. Reds take on the Cleveland Guardians in spring training. Baseball is back, and we are both excited for what the new season will be. Jeff, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your weekend, and let's see how those Reds plan out this year.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see, how the NL Central really plays out, and especially, too, when you got young players, young teams. This is usually always the time where you start to evaluate a lot of different talents. So I think this will be interesting. The Reds need that push. They need that jump. So we'll see. But shifting over to the NFL, because we know there's a huge shift in the NFC South, and talking about that, joining me via the Global Satellite Network presented by StreamYard, Aaron Freeman. All right, so Tom Brady officially retires. The NFC South, it's completely looking different. And we know the Falcons because they've got their bridge quarterback with Marcus Mariota. Then they go and draft Desmond Ridder. What was kind of the plan going into the season with Arthur Smith, knowing that he's an offensive-minded coach? He's got to get this team going. But I'll tell you what, I liked with what I saw from Drake London. So I'm excited for what year 2 will be. But how did you kind of project the entirety of the season? And what does that now have to mean for the Falcons going into this offseason and the draft?
Yeah, you noted that sorry. You noted that the Falcons kind of had Marcus Mariota as their bridge quarterback. And so we spent most of the summer kind of trying to figure out when were we going to see Desmond Ridder. And unfortunately, I think Tom Brady and the Buccaneers didn't take control of the division like I think a lot of people thought they would. And so we got to the midpoint of the season, the Falcons were 4-4 and in first place in the NFC South. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, I guess we'll just keep rolling with Marcus Mariota and see if we can really make a legit push for the postseason. And I think that kind of really delayed the plan for Desmond Ridder. Although, of course, Arthur Smith would say like, oh, well, he wasn't necessarily ready at that point in time, and we played him at the perfect time, or at least when we thought he was ready to play. And so it did feel like the Falcons didn't get the kind of definitive answer that I think a lot of us were hoping to get on whether or not Desmond Ridder is the guy. He showed a lot of promise, but it's hard to look at a 4-game sample and feel like, okay, well, we can feel really confident moving forward that he's going to be the guy. Although you kind of contrast that with Jalen Hurts' rookie season, where he got 4 starts at the beginning of the year, kind of inconclusive, but the Philadelphia Eagles decide to roll with him. And then 2 years later, they're, 1 drive away from potentially winning a Super Bowl. So that's kind of what I think Falcon fans sort of envision in an ideal world. Unfortunately, Falcon fans, we don't necessarily get the things that we want in this world. So we'll see if it comes through fruition. But it does feel like the Falcons have a real opportunity to really kind of take control of this division, given some of the flux, given that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who've kind of dominated this division the last couple of years with Tom Brady, seem to be in beginning of a rebuild. The New Orleans Saints are still trying to figure out their situation in a post Sean Payton world. And, it goes back almost a decade where, in the early part of the 2010s, it was kind of Atlanta versus Carolina at the top of the division. And the last couple of years has been more New Orleans versus Tampa Bay. And it feels like we're going back and rewinding the clock on that cycle. And at least sitting here today, it does feel like the Falcons and the Panthers are potentially, if anybody's looking to sort of make their bets early in this offseason, that may be competing for the top of the division, given the situations in New Orleans and Tampa Bay.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I know the first game that I watched during preseason, it was Falcons against the Lions. And when I watched Desmond Ridder, I was like, okay, he's kind of got something there. He's pretty accurate. He's somebody that I think can distribute the football when he's got a healthy offensive line around him, and he's got real good weapons that could help get him to distribute the football, even yards after catch. So I want to shift to the running back because I watched Cordero Patterson and I thought he was a real good get for the Atlanta Falcons. And then I watched Tyler Allgeier. How have you evaluated his game? Because I feel like in this league, you kind of have to have a two, possibly a real good running back by committee in this league. How did you kind of see Tyler Allgeier really fit himself in with the Falcons?
Yeah. Tyler Algier was an interesting draft selection because it felt like kind of like a consolation prize when the Falcons got him in the 5th round. Like they needed to get a younger running back, and Algier was kind of like the best guy available after there was kind of a run of some of the good running backs in the 3rd, 4th round. And so going into the season, I kind of expected him to be part of the rotation, but it kind of felt like it was going to be Cordero Patterson's, role. And we saw him in that week 1 game really dominate the New Orleans Saints. And then a couple of weeks later, he got hurt. And Algier kind of was just okay that first, half of the season. It was just like, yeah, he was out there. He was doing some things. The Falcons running game was very effective, but it was mostly more effective when Cordero Patterson and their 3rd string running back, Caleb Huntley, were in the lineup. And they were like, I think averaging like 5.5, 6 yards per carry in that first, 2 months of the season. Meanwhile, Algier's averaging like 3.9 yards per carry or something like that. And then something clicked when Patterson came back. It just felt like Algier got comfortable in the scheme, and he was playing with, a lot faster, being more decisive, and just kind of went off those last, 8-9 games of the season. And, finished with 1,000 yards, was, sort of a dark horse to potentially come in and steal the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. And right now it looks like he's going to be that RB1 in the future. Patterson's going to be back in probably a limited role, but I think the Falcons are going to continue to look to get younger. And given how much their offense is predicated on running the football, adding another running back that can kind of be what we thought Tyler Algier would be behind Tyler Algier this upcoming season to kind of share the load with him is certainly, I think, something that's going to be on their radar in the draft. But yeah, it does look like Tyler Algier has this running game in very good hands, especially if he can basically pick up where he left off. Like I think we did an episode on Locked On Falcons where, like, if you just extrapolated like the last 9 games of the season to a full 17-game season, like he'd be like a 13 or 1,400 yard rusher this upcoming season. So that's kind of what we're hoping for with this Falcons running game, and that's kind of the bread and butter of this offense.
Yeah, it's really exciting stuff. And I love it when, a lot of these young kids, Tyler Algier, and then you have Drake London, a lot of these young cats, these guys, there really are going to be promising factors for the Falcons moving forward. And especially too, when you got Arthur Smith, who is trying to make this whole thing work, and I'm glad of the fact that, given the fact that you have an owner like Arthur Blank, like he's really, really patient, a guy that really does love what he sees, and he's seeing the promising future for what the Falcons have, but they definitely got to add in more pieces. So I've watched Kyle Pitts now for the last 2 years. And I'd said, coming out of Florida, he was going to be an interesting pick if, in fact, he's in the right scheme. Um, what have you seen Kyle Pitts? Because I'm just kind of like, I'm waiting for like that flashy tight end thing, and has it kind of been difficult for him to really mesh in with this offensive schematic? Like, how have you evaluated this?
Yeah, it is an interesting conversation with Kyle Pitts, right? Like, because he came in as a rookie, had 1,000-yard season, was very productive, kind of like one of the best rookie seasons a tight end has had from a production standpoint, at least in yardage, that we've seen in the last 50, 60 years, since I think Mike Ditka set the record for the most yards for a rookie tight end back in like 1960. And so like it felt like Kyle Pitts got off to really promising start. He only had one touchdown as a rookie. So it was like, okay, well, we know he can get yards. We just got to get him the ball in the end zone going into year two. And then you get to year two, and it really felt like him and Marcus Mariota were just not on the same page at all. And it led, I think, a little bit to when he had opportunities, they couldn't get him the ball. And I don't think that was a scheme issue. I don't think that's a Kyle Pitts issue. I just think you kind of look at Marcus Mariota and his inconsistencies as a passer as a big problem. And then you couple that with kind of the Falcons were winning games by running the football, and they kind of made Kyle Pitts a little bit of an afterthought in the offense. They still threw him the ball. Like, I think we ran the numbers, and like you look at him along with the top tight ends like Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, like when you look at the amount of targets they get versus how many routes they run, it's about 25% of all their routes they get targeted. And Kyle Pitts was like the top guy in the NFL, but because the Falcons never threw the ball, like it didn't really do anything for his numbers. And so that's going to be, I think, a thing entering this third year that is going to be a big topic of discussion. Is like, okay, can we get Kyle Pitts? And you're hoping that with Desmond Ridder or whoever the Falcons quarterback is this upcoming season, I think it's going to be Ridder, but we'll see. There'll certainly be some interesting conversations and discussions over the next couple of weeks as we approach free agency on that regard. But I think if you can get improved quarterback play, you feel better about where Kyle Pitts is entering his third year. But it has been kind of a thing that we've discussed on Lockdown Falcons. Like we cannot be in a situation, 9 months from now, still having the conversation about why isn't Kyle Pitts getting the football? You made him the highest drafted tight end ever with the 4th overall selection 2 years ago. And, you can't waste that amount of talent that he has to be not only a kind of your top playmaker in your passing game, but also, a guy that can put the ball in the end zone at a high level. And we just have not seen that consistently so far in his short NFL career.
Yeah, and you think about it, I mean, Atlanta has had a pedigree of tight ends. I mean, the fact that they had Tony Gonzalez late in his career where he was still putting up numbers, Algie Crumpler, and then you had Austin Hooper. So, there's times where, I mean, I've seen it where I was just kind of like, man, how are they going to really get Kyle Pitts to get going? Because at least being a red zone threat, absolutely. I'd be working on that field of play and, at the very least, make that adjustment to where the Falcons can be dangerous in the red zone to where they could potentially get more opportunities to gain momentum their way and then possibly win football games that way. So free agency is coming up March 15th. I've marked my calendar. I'm excited to see what it'll look like. So there's lots of talks. The Falcons have been talking about, getting close to Jesse Bates from the Cincinnati Bengals. How have you evaluated this offseason with the Falcons with as far as free agency, and who are some targets that you're hoping the Falcons really get aggressive on signing?
Yeah, Bates is one, probably the top guy on my personal wish list, and I hope he's going to be the top guy on the Falcons wish list. One of the former Bengals defensive backs coaches currently on the Falcons staff, and this regime under Arthur Smith and GM Terry Fontenot has primarily looked at players that they have familiar with Fontenot coming from New Orleans, Arthur Smith coming from Tennessee, a lot of their coaching staff coming from the Chicago Bears on offense, and then bringing in Ryan Pace, the former Bears GM. So they basically have brought in a whole bunch of ex-Titans and a whole bunch of ex-Bears over the last couple of years. And, with that connection with Jesse Bates, you hope that that can be a thing that can lure him. But I think Bates is kind of like the signature marquee guy in an offseason that I think you'll see the Falcons really invest significantly in their defense. With Ryan Nielsen, their new defensive coordinator, coming from the New Orleans Saints, the expectation is that he's going to bring some of those former Saints that were successfully running his scheme up front now to Atlanta. Players like David Onyemata, the defensive tackle, Marcus Davenport. You have Sheldon Rankins, who was a former first-round pick of the Saints, now with the New York Jets. So those are kind of the signature guys that you kind of expect the Falcons to really build, especially on the front, where Fontenot has already indicated that that's going to be their focus, is really upgrading a pass rush that has been dead last in the NFL over the last, I think, 4 years combined in terms of generating sacks. So I think you're going to see this team really invest a lot of resources at all three levels of their defense this upcoming March. Jesse Bates could probably be the signature guy. They'll probably get another linebacker, and they'll certainly add a number of pass rushers and run stuffers up front to really kind of revamp their defense. I think they're going to kind of, relatively speaking, be kind of cool and chill on the offensive side of the ball. I think it's going to be more about retaining their players and letting some of the young pieces like Drake London, Desmond Ridder, Algier, Kyle Pitts, et cetera, kind of grow into their role. So I think really their focus, and a lot of the cap space that the Falcons have, the second highest cap space in the NFL entering this offseason, at about $56 million behind the Chicago Bears, who have nearly double that. But I think a lot of their money is going to be devoted to really revamping and rebuilding and upgrading this defense.
And they've got at least a break with the fact that, Tom Brady retiring now from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So there's an opportunity where all these teams in the NFC South, because honestly, I've said this before, that we all have had to kind of have to come to grips with the New Orleans Saints. They're way over the cap. They got to make some moves and they got to make some changes. And, with their quarterback situation, with the fact that they were dealing with Jameis Winston, then they have Andy Dalton. I don't really see them being that kind of threat team because of the fact of they're dealing with cap hell. They got to get rid of a lot of big time contracted players in order for them to meet the threshold. So Mickey Loomis has a lot of decision making to do. So when you look at this NFC South, we know that the Panthers, I think now when they have Frank Reich, they're going to be looking for their next quarterback. And I think that team will be competitive because their defense now getting better with Brian Burns and with a bunch of their defensive core. And then the Buccaneers, they're going to go with Kyle Trask. I'm curious to see how that really works out. So how do you really look at, with knowing with the Falcons that they're really trying to build something special with their core, how that this could really impact this division?
Yeah, I think the Falcons are going to try to obviously make a push to make the postseason, something that they were not able to live up to last year after a very promising start to the year. And I feel like they're situated well, right? The NFC South is not going to necessarily produce a juggernaut, as you just kind of laid out. Like, all of these teams are kind of in this sort of middle ground of maybe they could maybe they can be competitive, maybe they can be a playoff team, but a lot of these teams have question marks right now. Certainly the Falcons are not without their question marks, but I think a lot of these teams other than the Falcons have a lot more concerns at the quarterback position, which is not something that you necessarily want to have if you're looking at as a playoff team. And obviously, I'm sure there are plenty of people that think the Falcons have those concerns at the quarterback position because they do not have the level of confidence in a player like Desmond Ridder after 4 starts as I do, and I think a lot of people within the organization do. But I do feel like this is an opportunity for the Falcons to kind of break their 5-year streak of missing the postseason. They haven't been to the postseason since 2017. And you just kind of look at this division, a lot of these questions as you just kind of laid out. Carolina doesn't necessarily have a quarterback. I do think Carolina, as I mentioned earlier, if they can figure out their quarterback situation, should probably be the team that you kind of look as the front runner to win the division, just because they have kind of established all the pieces around that position, and the Falcons are looking to establish all their pieces, as I just mentioned, trying to build a defense that's going to be competitive. But I think Yeah, I don't know what's going on in Tampa Bay. We'll see what they do. I mean, they're going to still have some good players, the Vita Veas, the Antoine Winfields, but until they can kind of figure out, is Kyle Trask the guy? I'm not that impressed with Kyle Trask, but that feels like a move that you kind of roll with him because you're planning on tanking to get a better quarterback in 2024. And of course, New Orleans is always just constantly in a state of trying to run it back and trying to figure it out. And we'll see if like they land a Derek Carr or somebody along that lines. And I think, to outside people, if they are to land a quarterback like a Derek Carr, that may give some people some confidence to say, okay, well, the Saints are the team to beat just because they have the most established quarterback in the division, but they're going to have to deal with some issues, losing, Michael Thomas probably in all likelihood, losing a lot of the pieces on their defense, potentially this offseason, some of them coming to Atlanta, hopefully. So I think this division is going to be very much in flux, and the Falcons have a golden opportunity to kind of take it, to take it into their own hands this upcoming year.
Yeah, and it is kind of interesting, and I'll get your thought before we let you go. But last year, what I was really impressed with was, and I live in Vegas, the fact that they were really good against the spread.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. Are we going to maybe see something like that again with the Falcons?
You tell me, since you're in Vegas, you tell me how consistent is it year to year with some of these teams. But yeah, I think they started something ridiculous like 9-0 against the spread last year.
Yeah.
And it was just like just printing money, right? And then things kind of went off the tracks after that for a bit. But yeah, it was a fun little run that the Falcons had in terms of, usually I don't necessarily bet on the Falcons because anytime I feel like they're going to cover, they disappoint me in that regard. But last year it was a nice 2 months where it felt like, okay, like the Falcons are they're not winning all the games, but at least I'm winning a little bit of money on the side.
Yeah, they were helping out some of my tickets because I was like, if they're against the spread, I'm like, okay, I kind of feel confident in Atlanta, because if they were the favorites, it probably would have been a little scary. Like I remember with the game when they played against Carolina, I thought maybe they might try, but once Carolina really just stomped the brakes on them, I was like, yeah, that's where I was like, yeah, kind of something where I know Atlanta, because they'll be in games, and even in games where they try to cover the spread, at least they give you that point amount to where they're kind of looking like that reliable team where they can help your ticket out. So we'll see with how next season will be like for them. But I think, yeah, adjustments on defense is a big thing, especially when you're really trying to get the best out of AJ Terrell and you're really trying to get that secondary to really be a shutdown team, because of the fact of, you watch Tampa Bay's offense. We know it was abysmal last season, but they still got some good names. And several other teams that got some good wide receivers, even Carolina with DJ Moore. I was surprised they still, kept him around, but they're thinking, thank God we kept him around. So it's going to be interesting. The NFC South's really going to have just a big change and a big look on them. So I'm curious to see what next season will be. I appreciate you coming on, Aaron. Where can everybody find you getting locked on those Falcons?
Yeah, Locked On Falcons, daily Falcons podcast on whatever podcast platform you want to check us out, including on YouTube. And of course, if you enjoy snarky tweets about the Atlanta Falcons, you can follow me on Twitter at FalcFans. That's FalcFans.
And there you go, folks. And of course, too, with the draft coming up, I'd like your opinion on it as a quick little spurt. But what do we see the Falcons taking? Because I'm almost thinking, depending on how free agency, because I know they're going to be up in the, in defense, but I almost kind of see them maybe getting another reliable target after they dealt away Calvin Ridley. Who do you see them as their first pick?
I think they'll go defense. It'll either be one of the top pass rushers, a player like Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech, I think makes a lot of sense. But I'm leaning more towards the secondary, getting another number 2 corner across from AJ Terrell. As you mentioned, I feel like it's either going to be Devon Witherspoon, the corner out of Illinois, or Christian Gonzalez, a corner out of Oregon.
Yeah, I kind of thought of that too with Witherspoon, because I think he's just a shutdown corner, and I think he'd be a perfect duo fit with AJ Terrell. So that'll be a really good defense to watch from there. And then add Jesse Bates in the middle of that mix. Falcons fans would be absolutely ecstatic about it. So All righty, Aaron, take care of yourself. Have a great weekend, and we will see how this offseason and the draft will look like for the Falcons. Take care, my friend.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. We are stacked with a bunch of these interviews. It's been great so far. Hour number 2 coming up next, live in Las Vegas. It's the Snake Sports Talk Show.
SeatGeek is the official sponsor of the Snake Sports Talk Show, with hundreds of events listed, live concerts, sporting events, and so much more. Go on to SeatGeek.com, enter promo code Snake Sports Talk Show, and save yourself $20 off your first purchase.
Live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts right now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Hour number 2 live in Las Vegas. It's the Snake Sports Talk Show wherever and however you may be watching and listening. iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram, where you can like, follow, and subscribe. Keep you up to date on future and past shows. Hour 1 completed. Here we are in hour number 2. Shout out to Jeff Carr and Aaron Freeman earlier. Locked on Reds, Locked on Falcons. Pleasure having them. Hour 2, we've got Garrett Bush, Locked on Browns. And then later on, Jimmy Morris, Locked on the Tennessee Titans. So I'm excited about this because, NFL free agency, and it is interesting to seeing how, a lot of teams, they really shape up by this offseason. And it is, I'm a little curious, and so this is going to be one of those years where, we got a really good free agency in the last few years, and it's been exciting. Players are starting to get better in certain terms as far as their physicality. And of course, their mindset when it comes to really learning a lot more of the playbook. But the other thing is they just bring in a lot of really good promising stuff. So that's what makes a lot of teams really just, blossom. So I really am, I'm curious as to how some teams are really, really going to turn out and pan out, because the fact of, you just look at a lot of these teams now in the offseason, and there's a lot of positions that have to be addressed. And there's even some that we evaluated from either their first year or their second year, and how big of an impact that they're going to make by that next season. And there's a lot of teams that we're keeping an eye on. We are evaluating a lot of their talent. We're evaluating a lot more as to what they'll shape to be. But there's a lot of serious conversations with a lot. So, um, but again, I think we've seen a lot of truths with some teams. We've seen truths with about, the players that they have. They either do mesh or they don't really cut it out for their system. There's even some, that they were hidden gems. They were surprise finds. The NFC always is filled with hidden gems, and they really find them far and wide, which is one of those things that even the difference between, the AFC and the NFC is because the AFC will draft high graded players. And the NFC, they'll do almost as similar, but you go and get a fifth through, you get a fourth through seventh round guy who just so happens to really work in this system. It's beyond compare. So, again, I think there's a really, really good chance that there are some teams that are actually going to because I see Carolina possibly running this division. If they get their quarterback, I feel like Will Levis would be a perfect fit. And Frank Reich can work with his talent. They can work with whatever that, he kind of builds into his own. So there's some good promising stuff from there. And even some other teams in the NFC. I mean, the Rams, they are building up to where they're getting more cap space. There's talks about, Jalen Ramsey being moved. So I'm kind of interested with how this goes. So a topic of discussion before we have the next interviewer come up. So Aaron Rodgers, as if we haven't talked a lot about him enough throughout the entirety of the season and beyond. So Aaron Rodgers, and a lot of people reacted. Everybody was all just like, "Oh, he's come back. He's it was a long time coming from his end." But the thing about Aaron Rodgers is he is his own person. And we always know that whatever Aaron Rodgers does is whatever Aaron Rodgers does. So, Aaron Rodgers, he emerged from his darkness retreat and left the facility. And this is from Scott Berman, um, one of the writers from ESPN, and how he explained it. So, Scott Berman, he's the owner of Sky Cave Retreats. Berman said that where Aaron Rodgers stayed at is a 300 square foot room in which he spent his time is a partially underground structure devoid of light. So it's completely dark. You can't see a damn thing, with a queen bed, a bathroom, and a meditation like mat. I kind of give credit to Aaron with as far as going through that. But if you had me in a dark room that long, I don't know how long, I don't even know how lengthy the days were, but I would imagine he's not phased by it. I mean, you look at him and you just see exactly like all of his stuff. The fact that he did ayahuasca, the fact that he, was really searching for his inner aura. He was really, into this and that. Um, Aaron Rodgers is just a one of a kind. I don't know really how to put the narrative on this, but this is kind of the thing with Green Bay. I really just am like, I'm trying to connect the dots and really try to explain this as best as possible. But I know Green Bay has to be coming into the crossroads with this, because what does Aaron do during the OTAs last year? He was focusing on himself. He was focusing on his inner aura. He has his girlfriend, Blue of Earth, and very spiritual. So he's tapping into his spiritual self, and I like that. And I like the fact that a lot of people that are very spiritually uplifting people. It's always nice to have that positivity and that energy. I like that. I don't really knock on things like that. But Aaron Rodgers is just on an entire plateau and a level that nobody else could really, compete with. So First of all, you take ayahuasca and, again, it's a type of psychedelic. And so, you know, dealt with a lot of this stuff. Dealt with, and we came to the truth as to why he took ayahuasca, because he's afraid of death. And all of us have a fear of something. So I respect that for Aaron Rodgers. I can understand that. It does get scary. We don't know where our souls and where our lives move on after from this life. We don't know. We're very curious. We live in the unknown state. But I can understand where Aaron Rodgers, it is a kind of a fearful thing. But but I know, as me, as a firm believer and as somebody that's spiritually uplifted who has a strong relationship, I know for a fact that I know where my family is. And I also know other members of my family would follow too. And so I have that strong sense, because I know that feeling. I don't know what it's going to look like when I'm older and older and older. I don't know what is in store, whether, do I go to the right place? I don't know. We're in the state of curiosity and we're in the state of the unknown. But for Aaron Rodgers, I mean, the fact of being in a darkness retreat room is kind of something over the top. Now, I know it is something that with Aaron Rodgers, this is who he is. Like, we dig into Aaron Rodgers' life and we dig into what he does. And and again, we've watched the Aaron Rodgers who's won the Super Bowl during that tenure with Green Bay. We've watched Aaron Rodgers win multiple MVPs, and he's got the golden arm. He's very accurate, doesn't seem to miss a beat. But this past year, they missed the playoffs and they lost to Detroit, their division rivals. So Green Bay is in this state of mind that Aaron has got to really get all of his chips in. Now, we don't know if, in fact, Aaron Rodgers will remain a Packer. Most people are anticipating, people that I trust as far as sources go, that he may end up with the Packers still. He may not move. But given all the, all the stuff and all the information, it really is a trip. But it is something that I think when we get closer and closer into um what Aaron Rodgers' decision really is, I'm just kind of like this. Are you invested in football or are you not? This is the conversation that I think Green Bay really has to have. It's not something that's personal to Aaron Rodgers. I love the fact that he's really investing and taking the time to really helping his inner self, and especially too, it's a spiritual mindset, it's a mental mindset, and it's a lot of those things. And even for some, it even helps out physical wise. Here's what I do believe in. And I see people like this at the gym almost all the time. You see people who are strong, who are ripped, who are fit, but it depends on what their energy's like. If they're positive energies where they love they treat their bodies like temples, they shape them. There's chisels. There's times where they really have to reshape a lot of what their bodies are, what they're used to, what they can handle, and some they got to kind of cut out the bad stuff. So I respect a lot of people who see that. And there are those that when they look good, they get positively good. It's not only just an ego stroke, but it's one of those ones that it's a confidence booster. So Aaron Rodgers, I know, in a position with Green Bay, it's young wide receivers. We know that he didn't really take the time to really talking with these wide receivers and really, setting the tone for what the Packers are. They're big on defense. Rasul Douglas, Jair Alexander, Rashawn Gary. They've got some real good pieces. But we know that Green Bay in a division right now where the NFC North, the Vikings took it. I anticipated them to winning the division. The Lions were going to be much better. They are starting to get gradually better, and they're already getting Amon-Ra St. Brown to try to recruit Jalen Ramsey. And then the Bears better be shopping for the right pieces. Because I just am like, I'm at a point, um, I'm at a point where I if you have if you like I noticed that, like, with the Bears, they just trend in this direction, and I've said it over and over again. I think a lot of this has to stem from the ownership. A lot of it does. So when I look at this, I'm anticipating and I think to myself, uh, Chicago really has to get better at it because you can't butcher Justin Fields. You've butchered every single quarterback that you've come around in that division, and it has not looked right. It has not looked well. So I'm anticipating Chicago really has to do the right thing because if I see certain questionable moves, that's an ownership problem. They cannot get past that tradition that the Bears have always been used to. But for the Packers, they produced a lot of really good offensive players. I think Christian Watson really has arrived in the NFL, and he'll be great in year two. Romeo Dobbs looks like he could be a promising wide receiver. From the headlines, they are working on a deal to maybe potentially keeping Alan Lazard. But the thing about it is that you bash on this door where, you know, we need offense, we need receivers, we need receivers, we need receivers. And they've got themselves some. All it really leads up to is Aaron Rodgers fully invested or is he not? Now we know the narrative was the Packers were going to be comfortable trading Aaron Rodgers. I said this too, that if they do, you're going to be looking for 2 first-round picks. You're not going to be you'd be lucky if a team is out there and they give you a third first-round pick. They give you a third. That would be totally lucky. But we know that with Aaron Rodgers, where his mind and where his focus is, if that is a case in point to where he can make that team competitive. I thought Nashville would have been perfect. With the Tennessee Titans, I think it would have been a really good ideal place. I think it would have worked out perfectly. But because of the fact of you just see his demeanor, you just see with what he does. And again, I'm not knocking on Aaron Rodgers at all. I hope people know that. But I just see it to where you know where people's focuses are. You know with what is in store. You know with what they're trying to do. And I think for Aaron, you really kind of have to have that conversation. You really have to have the you really kind of have to have that conversation where it makes sense. And I think for Aaron, it's going to bring up a lot of truths. And we know that it's going to be one of those things where the Packers, they just have to be real with themselves. And by the way, they also have a gamer, Jordan Love. Don't tell me that they have not found exactly their quarterback. I think he is that quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is great, but if you're not lasting with Aaron Rodgers for long, at least you have Jordan Love. This was a point that the Packers ownership was trying to make. They know they have a quarterback. They know they traded up to get a quarterback, and they know this is a guy that they're really putting all their chips in. And Matt LaFleur last year was rocky because we know he's great against Detroit. He could be great against Chicago. When you play Minnesota or you play the Giants, the Eagles, possibly the Cowboys, and play amongst a lot of these teams, the road gets tougher. That's where Matt LaFleur really got tested this past year. So it will be interesting to see what Matt LaFleur does, how he rebounds, how he possibly, makes this work and how he makes it happen. But again, I can only see with what the Packers are really going to end up doing. But I just think that with the entirety of the trips, the Um, and he talks a lot about his personal life, which is, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I think with Aaron Rodgers, to me, some of the personal stuff, I would sometimes kind of keep it at least to a minimal. I would still talk about, positive things. I would still talk about, certain stuff, but all the more personal stuff, that's the kind of thing where I'm like, I don't want to expose it all that much. That's where because it's a personal life and a lot of players. I've spoken to a lot of players. There's players that don't even have um ties to the NFL anymore since they were players. And that's respected because a lot of them, they want to live their lives. They want to live the retirement. They want to live the time where, yeah, I've spent my time playing in the league, but I'm not playing in it any longer. So, that's the topic of discussion I think that has to be made for the Packers. Is Aaron Rodgers really in, or do we kind of see Green Bay moving on? So, one of the topics I definitely wanted to get in. So there's a cap situation, and um, I think it's honestly time that we be real about the New Orleans Saints. So, we know the Saints are over the cap. They're about 44 million over the cap, and this is post Drew Brees. This is post Sean Payton. Now they have a lot of question marks they have to answer and fill, because the Saints are not exactly the same team as they once were. Michael Thomas, injury prone almost all the time. Alvin Kamara, he still has spurts, but it has not been the same offense. Now, Chris Olave, really good, promising wide receiver out of Ohio State. We know that he's got some really good stuff. And the other thing is that the defense really needs to make some moves. I love Marshawn Lattimore, but he's expensive. Cam Jordan, he's expensive. I don't see them getting rid of Demario Davis, and I probably don't see them getting rid of Cam Jordan because he's been the heart and soul of this Saints defense. But a lot of the pieces that are expensive, I do see them getting rid of Michael Thomas because his injury-prone self and the contract doesn't quite add up. So I see them moving on and really moving past and maybe looking at different options at wide receiver. The other thing, they might move on from Alvin Kamara depending on, the personal situation that he's had here in Vegas, which that's a possibility. But the Saints right now are nowhere close to where they could possibly compete. I do like Dennis Allen. I don't know if he's really the right head coach. He's defensive minded. The defense has always played hard and played strong, but I don't know if he really does have the leadership and as far as what it takes to really lead the team to the promised land. The Saints right now are just kind of in this bind. So they've got to start making some deals. Get first round picks, get guys, maybe second rounders, third rounders, whatever you need to do, but you got to get underneath that cap threshold. 40 million over, like, it does not look good. And there's penalties behind that. That's what, Mickey Loomis has to come across. So, and Sean Payton talks very positively about Mickey Loomis. He knows that there's, obviously a huge hell that's coming for them, especially when it comes to the cap situation. But we know that there's tough scenarios and situations. So it's not unlikely that the team doesn't quite, they don't quite figure out the structure and the mess. They're going to figure it out one way or another. And I think because of the fact that the Saints last year didn't make the playoffs, they looked like a completely different team. They don't seem to be like the similar, Saints team that we remember winning the Super Bowl, who were tough on defense, who were very special on offense. It's not that same team. And they don't have that leadership with Sean Payton or with Drew Brees. So you really have to be honest with yourselves, because we know there's teams in cap hell. We know that they have to shed away cap space to at least be under. And we know that there's going to be several hard decisions that the Saints have to go through. There's other teams that are going to have to go through hard decisions. But if you're making the right ones to where you're keeping the future of the team intact, the other part, you've got necessary veterans in a lot of necessary spots that really can keep the consistency of this team, you'd be in the right place. You would be in a good spot. But the NFC South is so wonky, much like the AFC South is. Jaguars ran the division. The Titans took a step back. Colts are the Colts, and then the Texans are constantly rebuilding. But hopefully, D'Amico Ryans gets them out of that space. The NFC South, I mean, you said it best with Aaron Freeman. Like, the Falcons are clearly rebuilding. They know that Marcus Mariota is a bridge quarterback. They know Desmond Ritter has some stuff, and they want to experiment more on it. Arthur Smith is a smart offensive coach. We saw that with his tenure in Tennessee. Made the offense the way it was, even with AJ Brown, with Jonnu Smith, with a lot of those guys. So he's trying to implement it and at the same time give that opportunity where Kyle Pitts can rebound, where he could be better, where he could be a red zone threat. The Falcons are clearly rebuilding. The Buccaneers no longer have Tom Brady. They know they're going to be coming into some certain spurts, but Tampa Bay, they're going with Kyle Trask. I watched him in college in Florida. He's got some stuff. I don't know if that's something you can transition into the NFL, but he has something to really look forward to. But I've said it before where the Buccaneers can't figure out with what their offense was, because the offense was abysmal. Now we know injuries happen all the time, but they've got real good names. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. They've got Cameron Brate. I think Kate Ottman came in at a time where he was producing, and he needed to be that emergency guy. But there's several things to look at with Tampa, and then there's Carolina, where Carolina, I feel like Will Levis is a perfect fit with Frank Reich's system because he's got to have an accurate quarterback with a strong arm. DJ Moore can open up plays. They could possibly go and get a wide receiver somehow in Carolina to where it adds to their offense. And by the way, they have a real good running back by committee. Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Foreman really work. The defense, come on. Jeremy Chin, Brian Burns, Shaq Thompson, J.C. Horn, and Derek Brown. That's a real good, promising defense, which is why I say anybody that's going to walk into Charlotte and they could get a better offensive line, the line has to really reshape itself. And any quarterback that comes into this offense could really produce. Now, I think tight end, it will be questionable in that position, how they address it, but I think they might have their guy. But it could be Carolina's division. But this is the part where New Orleans really has to be honest. $44 million over the cap, getting penalized, and it's just too much money involved. We know it's hard, Saints fans, but you got a Super Bowl amongst it. It's time to really kind of come to that crossroad. Nobody likes to deal with hard decisions like this, but the Saints have to kind of go through it. It's not to say they won't still be competitive. They very much could. I mean, but you only get as much as what your coach is. Dennis Allen, good on defense. I don't know if he could really ride the whole ship, multitasking between offense and defense. So again, you could look at it one way or another. You could see it clear as day, and you could honestly make a bunch of points to where, well, New Orleans, even if they could finesse, but there is no other options. So I just think that New Orleans, they really have to kind of come to that honesty with themselves, and they really have to make that firm decision. I know they don't want to lose Marshawn Lattimore. I know they don't want to lose a lot of. I mean, hell, they got rid of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to the Eagles. So it's not like they couldn't manage to get somebody in there, but we know that there was a potential there, and we know that there is that fine line they really have to find themselves. So that's kind of where I am with New Orleans at this point. So free agency is gonna be nuts come March 15th, and I'm excited about it. All right, folks, we're going to be cutting it here short up on the show. I appreciate everybody who's joined on in here on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time hanging out with me. Shout out to Jeff Carr. Appreciated their time here on the show. iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram. That is the social medias you can like, follow, and subscribe to keep you up to date on future and past shows. Great interviews that we're still keeping on coming. Tomorrow, really good headlining interviews as we get geared up. We got more football talk to talk with you, but we've got Trey Matthews, Locked on Devils tomorrow, and then Lauren Willen, writer for Nesson, Locked on Red Sox, is going to be joining me. We're going to be talking more spring training baseball and what the state of the Red Sox are going to be tomorrow. Appreciate all your guys' time. Have a great Saturday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode of the Snake Sports Talk Show. Take care, guys. See you soon.